started. I want to say hi to everyone. I am Melissa Raspberry, and I work for the American Institute for Research, who has the distinct honor and privilege of being the manager and supporter and facilitator, et cetera, of the CS for All Teachers virtual community. You all may know us or have known us as the CS 10K community, and quite frankly, we may very well use that name tonight because we are still transitioning ourselves and how we refer to it. But we are a virtual community that has the financial support of the National Science Foundation, and initially we started this community space for high school teachers of the Exploring Computer Science and the Computer Science Principles courses. And I'm very excited to see a cross-section of folks here because with the CS for All initiative, the broader initiative with the White House, and as you know, computer science education was growing in popularity and gaining much more attention. I know there are many of you who've been doing this for a really long time, but we saw a need for rebranding ourselves and really expanding our offerings and programming to support all teachers, regardless of the age group and grade level that you're working with. So this is one of many things that we'll be doing this year that is applicable across the board, and we're excited for this work. So I'm just excited to be able to introduce to you to a great friend and colleague. And if you have not had the pleasure of being with Colleen before, she is absolutely awesome. Not only is she...
Don't oversell it, Melissa. She's just okay.
No. Yeah.
Good enough that you shouldn't hang up.
Yeah, exactly. I will say I'm going to take and put the number in the chat window there. I'll copy and paste that. We really do encourage you. We have a small group tonight, so it's great because this is your chance. You can ask lots of questions. So we hope that you will not only give voice through the chat window, but if you're able, that you will call in. You can either call in with that number, or I did change it so that you could call in or connect via your microphone, via your laptop or computer. And let's just really have this as a conversation. Colleen has some great stuff to share, but we want it to be interactive. So I'll hush. I'm here if anybody runs into technical problems, but I'm looking forward to learning from Colleen. So have at it.
Awesome. And, okay, welcome. I'm Colleen. I just think it's fun. Tonight we're talking about classroom norms, and my classes have been going for a while, and probably your classes have been going for a good while. And I find it's just helpful to check in and really reflect on how my classroom culture is going, how my classroom norms are going. And I think it's easy to it's really easy to fall into patterns and things that feel like ruts. And so I want to, come with you all and reflect on what do we want to change about our teaching practice? Okay, so I'm going to launch in. So we've got this website, CSTeachingTips.org. We're also funded by the National Science Foundation. So that's one of the things we do is we try and collect these tips for teaching computer science. So to kick us off, maybe chat in the chat window. What are some things that are going well or could be going better? And while you're thinking about that and typing that up, I'm going to go and just introduce my project, CSTeachingTips.org, where some of this information that we're going to be talking about today comes from. So we're a website, like I said, funded by the National Science Foundation. We've got more than 1,000 tips for teaching computer science, and they're based upon interviews with over 150 teachers. So if you think, oh, I've got some tips I could contribute, I'd be happy to Skype with you and pick your brain and write down some tips from you, and then disseminate those online. And the basic idea is, there's all this insight into the teaching and learning of computer science. So this is one of my favorite tips, is looking at this code. And this is code in Scratch, which maybe folks are familiar with, but if not, you can probably figure it out. So it's saying repeat 1, play note 60, which is just middle C, for half a beat. And the question here is oh, how many times is it going to play that note? And I have students, and they're like, Colleen, it's going to play it twice. And I'm like, oh, wow, I'm like the worst teacher in the world. Woof. And they're like, no, Colleen, it plays it once, and then it repeats it. And I'm like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. And so that insight, being able to understand students' perspective there, helps me be a better teacher, helps me provide better scaffolding when students are stuck, yada, yada, yada. So it's trying to capture some of that. And I think about that as this pedagogical content knowledge, which is potentially familiar, potentially not. And it's just to teach computer science, I need the content knowledge, I need basic teaching practices, and I need teaching practices that are specific to CS. And what I think is so exciting across the country is that we have a lot of folks who are coming to computer science to teach it for the first time. And they likely have the pedagogical knowledge, and we need to figure out what are good ways of getting them ramped up on the content knowledge and the pedagogical content knowledge. That's what we're about. I have no one who has written anything in our little box. Anyone who's got their microphones on want to share something that's going well or something that could be going better? Oh, I've peer pressured Jenny into writing something. Level of excitement in new student learning. What needs improving, keeping those with prior knowledge engaged while in the intro section. I think that's super important in thinking about those issues of pacing in our heterogeneous classroom. So as we're going, I'll try and tie that in thinking about like those practices that are particularly well suited towards heterogeneous classrooms. At Harvey Mudd College, I'm a computer science professor at Harvey Mudd College, and what we do here is we try to create more homogeneous classrooms. So our students in our intro course are split between almost no experience, a little experience, and a ton of experience. So we have those 3 sections. Oh, wow. Ruth, you teach classes online. Yeah, some of the classroom norm stuff that we're talking about isn't going to be super relevant to you, but we'll think about, we have a small enough group, so I think we'll be able to think about like how some of it's going to apply to you. And we have a few more people talking. I think you'll remember the question, so I'm going to keep going on to the next slide, but keep adding that stuff in there. So as context, as we're waiting for Randy to type, sorry, Randy, I want to talk through some of these CS lab rules. So in addition to the 1,000 tips we have online, we also have some tip sheets that just list some of our more popular tips like around a central topic. So here I've picked lab rules, which are just sort of vaguely classroom normie rules. And I want to talk through the 7 tips we've got there. But for each one, I want to dig a little deeper than we do online. So online, we sort of explain the basics of accomplishing that tip. And I have a YouTube video for each one of them, like running through what the tips are, but I want to dig more into the details there. Randy is still typing, or maybe not. And so we'll go on to our first tip. And the question I had here was, our first tips relate to managing computer time versus announcement time. Oh, Randy, I don't teach in a classroom. Instead, I teach and run an after-school program. Right, you mentioned that to us before we started. And I find that students are engaged when allowed to choose their own projects. Yeah, so thinking about to Jennifer's challenge of having a heterogeneous classroom, thinking about to what extent, and we'll come back to that. Training after school programs, is that right? Yeah. So teach and run, but I'm guessing. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I started out running this program, and then I got hired by the Computer Science Teachers Association. Yeah, and we do training, and it's like you said, for teachers, it's the content, right? Because they've already been trained in the pedagogy. Although you made a good point, I think that there is some definite CS-specific pedagogy, and I think that's something that we are going to have to look into as well here in Oregon.
Yeah, but I think I think you need those 3 things. You need the like teaching knowledge, you need that content knowledge, you need the insight specific to teaching the computer science. But when I talk to teachers, the thing they're most concerned about is the content knowledge, and I think that makes sense because particularly for folks who are just learning computer science, they're able to empathize with their students in ways that they can't empathize when they're teaching algebra. Do you know what I mean? Like for most of us who are teachers, like it's been too long since we've learned algebra. And so the opportunity as a teacher to get to learn something and immediately turn around and teach it, I think is really powerful in being able to anticipate their expectations and their needs. Oh, we've got one more person, Trisha. Having a logic problem, main chooser, or some sort of challenge and mental problem on the board when they walk in. Oh, I love that. So that's one of the ways that you manage sort of like getting class started. Yeah. Okay, we've still got some folks adding in things. I'm going to go on to our next tip, and we can always like loop back. And I want to make sure that this, yeah, I agree that it's a nice tip, Trisha, and we'll add that. Oh yeah, so Vicky tries to really reduce how much time of lecture there is. Oh yeah, and so then they can watch videos and rewatch it. I've taught a bunch in a 6th grade summer camp, and I had one summer where I was doing research, and I had college students sitting behind my 6th graders and taking notes about what the 6th graders were doing. And I only lectured for like 15 minutes, but like not a single kid was listening to me. And so from that, I decided to go to a blended model where I make little YouTube videos. Yeah, so I'm with you, Vicky, of like these videos that they can watch after the fact is super helpful. Okay, I'm going to run to one tip, and this first tip is the pedagogical thing is like you request eyes and ears. I do eyes, ears, and monitors off. Sometimes what I do is depending upon sort of the flavor or like fun of my class, I do like a little dance move. So we like do like raise the roof when I need to make announcements. And what that's super helpful is I can get their eyes and their ears sometimes, but they might be sort of behind a big computer, and so it's a little bit hard to get their attention. And if I can get their hands off the keyboard and mouse, that's really key. We have this voting thing. And so let's give it a try to see if you like it. So try voting. And let me click. Can I broadcast results right from the beginning so we can just see it or no? And let me read this.
Yes, yeah. You should be able, are folks able to see it now? You make your choice, A or B, and then it updates accordingly.
That's rad. And yeah, Ruth mentioned, I find that my students like the video tutorials I put together rather than the videos off the web. Yeah, I think it's really interesting to think about the reasons why that might be the case. One, is it like the personal connection to you that they like, or is, like I know Ruth, or is it that they feel like that content is really customized to them because it's their teacher? I think that's sort of like an open question to me. Or is it just that you're better at explaining things than any of these other random videos on the internet? Yeah, okay, so Randy Plusman's the self-made tutorials. I use, if you are interested in self-made tutorials, I use Camtasia. You can get a 30-day free trial, and I really found it was easy to pick up how to edit the videos. And another pro tip on the making videos, if you mess up, don't stop the video. Just pause so that when you look back at the audio, you can see that pause in the audio recording and then start again. And that way you can look at these pauses and be like, oh, I must have messed up right before there, and cut kind of without listening to it to some extent. Oh yeah, you use Screen Cast-O-Matic. Oh, cool. I haven't heard of that one, but it's good to hear it works. Oh, cool. And Vicky says that they have older students make videos for the younger students. I haven't tried that. Yeah, but I dig it. I find also making the videos right before class lowers my standards a little bit, just so that I like move and get them out. Because otherwise I will edit out like little noises I make. Like I make an annoying tick noise before I start talking. And so if I have like some time pressure, it helps me a lot. Oh, and Jennifer's used QuickTime. Oh, that's good to know, to make short ones. Yeah, so there's a lot of tools. We can continue some of that conversation around these tools after the fact. Okay, so it looks like we have 5 voters where listening is not a problem, and for about half of us. Okay, so I think that this request eyes, ears, and monitor off can be helpful. And let me bounce to our next tip, and we can, what if we just, can you change your vote? Melissa, I'll let you handle that. So
I have another one set up.
Oh, okay, that's
Hold on one second.
Yeah, so Melissa's going to do some stuff, and then she'll give us a shout out when we're ready. Okay, so this is one I've started doing both in my lab-based classes and my other classes, which is counting down before breaks. So one is, I think it's really important, particularly when we're working with kids, to show respect for their problem solving. And so what I do is I'm like, okay, I'm going to cut you off in a minute. So you're going to have a minute to wrap things up, and either we're going to be done for the day or I'm going to make a short announcement. And just think about like, oh, what are the ways in which I would want an instructor to show respect to me and my problem solving process? And I try and do that here too. Similarly, I count down before breaks. So like, I'll do a 10, 9, 8, and I'm not trying to do like a, set that down in 3 seconds or I'll some punishment. I'm just trying to help them have a predictable expectation about what I want. Do you know what I mean? Like, oh, in 10 seconds you need to wrap up this conversation. So, but I value the conversations you're having and you're with your classmates. So I'm giving you that time rather than just saying, stop talking. Oh, and Melissa's got the tip 2 vote up. So thinking about, is stopping a problem versus not a problem? We've got 4 votes so far, and we're mainly on the stopping is not a problem. So I don't know that I can see who the stopping is a problem, but maybe these are some things to try. And certainly if folks want to add other things they use to increase stopping and to increase listening, I'll maybe throw in one more that I use for listening, which is when I make announcements, I stand where I can see all of the students' monitors. And I think that's helpful. I do it intentionally such that they have to turn around in their chair, so it's really easy to see if I've got their attention. And like I said on the first tip, having them turn their monitors off. That one took me years to come up with, and like, man, so I should have just had someone tell me, but CS Teaching Tips wasn't around then, so. Okay, so it looks like we're mainly doing okay getting students to stop their problem solving. And my emphasis in this tip is really to say like, oh, it's really nice to be able to show respect for our students' problem solving by respecting their time, by warning them about this. So Vicky turns off the lights when I need their attention and have their eyes on me, headphones off and hands off the keyboard. Yeah, so I think just like, for folks who have been teachers in other contexts, I think a lot of these practices just cut across and you just add a few more, like headphones off and hands off the keyboard. Yeah, I dig it. Looks like Jennifer's chiming in as well. I'm going to take us to the next one. So one thing I want us to talk about in thinking about our classrooms is, I am a less experienced middle school teacher, so I've done 6 or 7 years of summer programs, but that's it. I haven't been through a K-12 teacher credentialing program. I've learned most of what I know about K-12 teaching from my husband who taught middle school science. But I want us to talk about like when kids aren't behaving, what are we doing and that kind of thing. So let me add in first, Jennifer typed, if you can hear me, raise your hand. And you can do that. I like that. They'll like, if you can hear me, raise your hand, or if you can hear me, clap once. Depending upon the context. And you can, and then once they've got their hand up, they're quiet. I like that. So I heard about this thing on NPR this morning, and maybe for folks heard the same thing, but there's a new research paper out of the Yale University Child Study Center. And what they did was they gave teachers, either Black teachers or white teachers, video of 4 kids in a classroom. And they asked those teachers to be like, tell me when you think they're engaging in behavior that might become problematic. Okay, so that's what they're watching for. They're watching for sort of these warning signs of what might become problematic behavior. The video actually didn't include any behavior that could be described as problematic or that people found problematic in terms of, future behavior. And what the researchers were doing was they were looking at which of the students were the teachers paying attention to and watching for that bad behavior. And so they used eye tracking to see, they gave the teachers videos of 4 students, 2 white students, a boy and a girl, and 2 Black students, a boy and a girl. And they found that the teachers using eye tracking were disproportionately watching the Black children and even more watching the Black boy. And so the NPR piece and the research makes the argument of like, oh, you're only going to see bad behavior. You can only see bad behavior where you look for it. And so I think as an educator, it's really important for me to think about like, oh, these teachers who participated in the study, they're not like bad people. They're not racist people. Do you know what I mean? It's like these moment by moment decisions that we make as educators we're making all the time. And so thinking about research like this that suggests to me that I'm going to be more attentive to bad behavior potentially from my Black students. And to partially that like makes me sick to my stomach to think that that could be true. But this research and other research around implicit bias suggests that that is true. And so, if I'm participating in the same culture as the teachers that in their study, and so it makes sense to think I'm going to be looking for it in places unconsciously, differentially based upon my students' race and gender. They did another study, which was they gave people a description of some bad behavior, and this was like bad behavior, pushing and stuff like that. Do you know what I mean? Like stuff you can't have going on in a classroom. And then what they did was they varied the kid's name such that the kid's name would be perceived as a Black boy, a Black girl, a white girl, or a white boy. And they changed the name to signal that. And they also provided a context. So, this kid lives just with one of their parents, and that parent is working 3 jobs and yada, yada, yada. So some sort of background context about the family. And what they found was when the teacher's race was the same as the race they perceived of that student, they were more sympathetic to that student. Does that make sense? So I'm a white woman, and so if I was reading a narrative about a Black boy or Black girl, if I was given that context, I'm actually less empathetic than if I'm given that context for a white boy or white girl. So that's what they found in the statistical pattern in their study. And so I think this type of psychology research is really important to me in my teaching practice, and thinking about like, what are the ways in which these biases that make me sick to my stomach, I wish weren't there. What are the ways in which I can control these biases? Because I'm in such a position of power. And we've got one, Randy added, bias can be so subtle that it's hard to recognize, but studies like these can definitely help us become more self-aware. Yeah. And, and at the college level, which is what I'm doing, like misbehavior is not really the mechanism of bias for me. Do you know what I mean? Like, I work in an elite private school. My students are well behaved, but still thinking about the expectations that I have of them, I think is really important. Okay, and we'll keep talking about bias because I think it's really important. Okay, my next one, and I think we'll have Melissa set up another vote. So this rule seems very simplistic, I think, of like explaining food and drink restrictions. Tell students like, in most classrooms that you're in, you can have water, but here you can't have water. And explaining, the water can damage the keyboard, yada, yada, yada. And I think that piece of this rule is, for me, is not just about protecting the computers and the property and making sure things don't get damaged. Certainly that's important to me. But for me, the really big thing that I'm worried about is thinking about students' fear in my classroom. So let's, even without changing the question, I'm going to go to the next question is fear in your classroom a big problem? So what I found in working with kids who don't have a computer at home, they're really worried about breaking the computer in the classroom. That's what I've seen. And it makes sense, right? Like, say they break this computer and their family's going to become financially liable. Like, that's scary. And so it's easy for me to reassure kids, like, you are not going to break this computer. Do you know what I mean? Like, we understand the food and drink restrictions. We're going to keep those away. That's not hard. You're not going to use scissors, sort of anything else, sort of basic stuff. You can hammer away on this keyboard. You can program in any way you want, and it's not going to cause a problem. Okay. And I think that's really important. So far we have one vote before we switch to the is fear a problem in your classroom, and 0 votes for fear is a problem in the classroom. Certainly, I find fear is a problem in my classroom, and I think of it more generally than like fear of breaking the computer. I think just like fear of being wrong, fear of being slow, fear of learning it less quickly than others. I in my college classes and in my experience teaching sixth graders, I see a lot of fear. Um, and Jennifer put, I never thought that that might be afraid to break it. Um, yeah, I often wonder why they ask before they try to figure things out themselves. Yeah, I think I think once I had a single student explain to me sort of their fear, I was like, oh, that's super rational. Like, you're afraid to break the computer. And I haven't told you that there's nothing you can do in the programming environment that's going to break the computer. Even like them knowing that, like, oh, these error messages you're seeing, those are, you might describe it as the computer being mad at you, but the computer is not mad at you. It's not breaking it. There's no damage happening to the computer. And I think that's like uh, really important for students to recognize. My college students often admit that when they get error messages, like all that red, they sort of freak out and they freeze. And that prevents them from reading the error message, And I certainly can relate to that of like being overwhelmed by the error message and so not reading it. So that kind of fear kicks in for me too. And I think is a real barrier to our students being able to engage with the programming environments in playful and experimenting sort of ways. Um, yeah, Jennifer thinks that's an awesome point. Thanks, Jennifer. Okay, let's go on. Okay, yet. This is my big thing I use in my classroom to try and get around this fear is one of the main fears I see amongst my college students is sort of like fear that they aren't gonna get it. And so I try and describe things as like, oh, you don't understand this yet. So I find it's really helpful to tell students about my experiences trying to learn computer science, which like it didn't go well. Like the second semester course I took at Berkeley, I had to drop it. It was going so poorly. The second time I took that class after having to drop it, I got a 5 out of 25 on one of the exams. And I tell my students this because I think it's important for them to see oh, Colleen's made it. She's a computer science professor. But that doesn't mean this was easy to learn. Do you know what I mean? And I think I can do something to dissuade students from really digging into that geek gene myth that we've got. Not really. Yeah. So Jennifer. Vicky. Fear is an issue as far as looking dumb around their peers, but not really around harming the equipment. We talk from kids' knowledge on that they really harm the equipment. The kids know that they really aren't going to harm the equipment. Oh, kindergarten. Oh, yeah. So from kindergarten on, Vicky's saying they know they're not going to harm the equipment. I find with my college students though, still they're more worried about it than I think makes sense. And yeah, and so with this stuff, I'll pull up one quote from some of my research. So this was interviewing college students about their experiences in the intro course. And so this student said, even my professor told us that some people are just born that way with the mental outlook that is compatible with CS. They feel it's so easy for them. Yeah, and he told the rest of the people that some of you will try, but you won't get it. And it's just that your mental outlook isn't made that way. It's something you're born with. You can't help it. And so here, I think this, for me, reinforces the important role we play in setting cultural expectations. There is a cultural narrative out there that to do computer science, you have to have a geek gene. Do you know what I mean? But that doesn't make sense. I don't know a lot about biology, but I feel computer science has not existed for so long that it would make sense that we have some predisposition to computer science. And if you look at students' knowledge or a success learning programming, we're not able to predict it with math performance or other SAT scores. These other scores, people have been really interested in predicting, is this person going to be good at learning computer science? And we haven't been able to predict it. And I think that's because we're not that good at teaching it yet. And so, some students just like use the right strategies when they're programming, use the right strategies when they're learning it. And some students don't. And that makes some students really successful at it and some students really not. Um, and Randy points out, it's about the role models. And I think that's true. I think for all of us, we can be role models in our classroom by really embracing challenge, by really accepting our own mistakes, so thanking students when they correct us, showing this inquisitiveness and this all that other piece. And yeah, Trisha mentions it's all about this growth mindset. Yeah, so I have on my next slide, and I'm guessing this is pretty familiar to folks, but we can have Melissa throw up the little quiz question of like, oh yeah, I'm all about Carol Dweck's mindset sort of stuff. I think that still this mindset stuff is really tricky because I find I can't just tell students that they should believe in a growth mindset and then it just like fixes things. Do you know what I mean? Like I think that this growth versus fixed mindset is incredibly resilient to my attempts to dissuade it. And they're just getting it from a lot of places. And so I think it's important, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, I think it's really important to practice the strategies for engaging with students when they bring up fixed mindset ideas or sort of essentialist ideas. So far we have 2 votes for familiar with growth mindset. If you're not familiar with it, probably you understand from what we've talked about just now, probably it is intuitive. Yeah, and Randy points out, yeah, it's hard to teach. And I think it's easy to communicate the ideas, but it's hard to convince yourself of that. Like even I find I have a fixed mindset about my level of organization. I identify as sort of a disorganized person. And I'm always fearful that people are going to find out that I'm a disorganized person. And it's very different than my attitude towards computer science because I feel like, well, I don't know that computer science yet, but I think of organization in this very fixed way. So I think it's interesting, and I think Carol Dweck's book does a good job of thinking about the extent to which we hold these competing views around different disciplines. Yeah. Oh yeah, and Randy struggles with a teenage son getting it. Yeah, yeah. I have trouble with it myself, so I can certainly relate. Okay, let's keep going. Number 4, set the default homepage. So the survey question here, if we can have Melissa keep it open, is oh, are you having trouble with this start time? I think of this as a classroom norm or culture that's relevant to revisit during the school year. And in my 6th grade class where kids are working on the computer, I set that default homepage or default icons on the desktop so they can get started and head to the course materials right away. Yeah, and we've got some folks. So we have one person who says start time is a problem. I find wrap up time can be a problem too. But I find that I feel ethically okay taking advantage of students' competitiveness. And so I'll time students how quickly can we get everyone in our classroom logged on and on the curriculum webpage or whatever. And I start a timer and they go 100 times faster than if I'm not using the timer. And so it's totally silly and absurd, but whatever. I'm oh, 3rd period did it this fast, and 2nd period did it this fast, and I wonder if you could beat your time from Friday. And there's probably better ways, but that's the one that I found can achieve my goals where they are snappy when they're logging on and off. Yeah. Oh, and so every computer in the lab is set to the same icons and the same homepage. Yeah, that's super helpful. I worked in a classroom where I had to go computer by computer to set some of those icons on the desktop, but even then it was still worth it. Do you know what I mean? The 2 hours or whatever it took me to go and add them to every desktop was worth the time that it saved once kids were in my classroom in terms of their ability to get started and going. Okay. The second piece, this is sort of similar to this sort of second lens on the food and drink rules, is thinking about setting the default homepage. One thing when I started teaching computer science, I thought like, oh, this computer literacy stuff doesn't matter. Like, I'm a computer scientist. I love computer science, but I don't like using a computer. I think they're kind of terrible to work with and like whatever. I'm interested in how they work. That's fascinating. But I don't by themselves like it. And so I used to think like, oh, this computer literacy stuff just doesn't matter. We should really be focusing on the computer science and not the computer literacy. But I've really come 180 on that stuff because I find that students really perceive computer literacy as high value and high status. So like knowing how to use a USB drive, like being proficient at searching the web, all these computer literacy skills they use to show off their sort of fit within computer science. And so when I've worked with students who haven't had some of those basic computer literacy skills, I'm like, oh my gosh, if all of my kids need it, and they maybe don't need it for their success moving forward, but they might need it for their identity development as a computer scientist. If all my kids need it, I have to be teaching it in my class. And so I recognize that it can be boring and not maybe the best, like the most engaging thing. But if I really care about all of my students having that, I teach it. Vicky says, my classes are part computer literacy, part digital citizenship, and part computer science. Yeah, I think that's really key. This is maybe a tangent, but I have been working on a book chapter trying to look at why should every kid learn computer science? And I think this citizenship argument is really key of like, oh, as humans, you need to be able to understand the world around you. And I think that piece and some of the computer literacy pieces are really, really important. And Randy points out that that your students are going to have differential access to computer literacy based upon their access to a computer outside of school and their general socioeconomic status. Yeah, totally essential. And so thinking about not just might there be a heterogeneous classroom, but might that heterogeneous classroom be differentially favored towards particular socioeconomic status. Yeah, super important. Okay, and we've got some more typing, and I'll keep going on to our next one. So scheduling breaks for stretching. I am really bad about this one, but I want to talk about it because I think it fits into this general thing of trying to dispel some of these stereotypes. So much like the geek gene stereotype that we're trying to dispel, I think it's really important to dispel this asocial and obsessed sort of narrative. And so Randy mentioned that more students are more comfortable using mobile devices, phones and tablets than computers. Yeah, so I think this is going to become even more relevant. So our students who have, back to four for a second. Our students who have a desktop or a laptop computer in the home and a mobile phone or tablet, those students maybe don't need us to teach them any computer literacy, but not all of our kids are going to have that access depending upon where we teach. And so I think it's really important to make sure we provide that. And Vicki mentions that the kindergarten students haven't had a mouse, have never used a mouse these days, and so teaching that. Oh my gosh, one time a student was using a mouse and they had their arm rotated and they were going like this, which moved the mouse left and right on the screen, and I was like, oh yeah, you're never going to learn how to use this. Like, even just the knowledge of how to teach someone how to use a mouse, I had never needed that knowledge and hadn't realized that like, oh, actually, if you've never done this before, it's not maybe that intuitive. Okay. So scheduling breaks for stretching. So it sounds like attention within the classroom is a problem for some of us. Certainly, I find it true for myself and for my students of thinking about like, oh, being able to get them into a state where they're kind of like moving through things and not too distracted and not too like glued to the screen type of thing, I think is a challenge. So let's talk a little bit more about that. From the same study as the last quote, students talked about what it means to be a good computer scientist, and these college students said you have to be able to make it their lifestyle, can't do it as a side thing, have to be thinking about it all the time. And so I think these quotes are helpful for thinking about sort of what that broader cultural context is around what our students think computer science is. And so I think the extent to which within our classroom we can say, oh, uh, this involves collaboration, this involves taking breaks, this involves like things other than staring at a computer and having outside interests, being able to think about not just what code you're writing, but how someone might be able to use your code. Those are all valued things within the discipline. I think can do some to try and dismantle this cultural narrative. Um, uh, oh, and I only have students for 30 to 45 minutes at a time, so I don't do this except in kindergarten first. And Vicki, maybe that was about teaching them how to use the keyboard and mouse, maybe? Sorry, I missed a little bit of context there. I have one more quote, which I'll bring up as Vicki's typing a response. Another student mentioned that, to be a good computer scientist, you had to not have a social life so you can think about your programs all day long. And so I know that, this idea of stretching or like teaching students good practices of like every 20 minutes looking at least 20 feet away for at least 20 seconds or standing up and stretching and just helping them understand the value there is helpful for their health in general. And so Vicky's point was, scheduled breaks. Yeah. So if you have a super short class, you might not schedule breaks. And I think, and I've never been good about it. I can't speak to being good about this either as an individual or as an educator. And I think Vicki mentions they can stand up if they need to. And so creating classroom norms where students aren't just glued to the computer screen can be really helpful, particularly probably for the young students you said you're working with. And I think, something that I find comes up in my classrooms a lot is like these ideas about who does computer science. And I think that they have this broken model that like a computer scientist is cut from a cookie cutter and doesn't accept the fact or doesn't sort of this cultural narrative doesn't include the idea that like, computer scientists are all really different. Do you know what I mean? And like there's depending upon your age kids, it might not be appropriate to like engage them in this, but like, maybe some computer scientists are asocial, but there's probably a spread, I'm like, not all of them are social. Some of them are going to be super, super social. And so I think engaging students who like can reasonably understand sort of this population variation around like, we think of them all as asocial or we think of them all as obsessed with computer science, but that can't be all of them. Randy, figuring out how to give good scheduled breaks. One thing I do in my classroom is I use a Scratch project as a timer. And so I just made a Scratch project and I'm happy to share that as well. And it plays music every 5 minutes. So when I have kids pair programming, I use that Scratch project and it shows whether partner A or partner B is the driver and the navigator, etc. And then it plays music every 5 minutes so kids can switch without me intervening. And you can imagine doing a similar thing every 20 minutes, just saying, everyone a stretch break, and I'm going to play 30 seconds of music, and you're going to stretch during that time. And Vicki posted like this for showing what's available in CS careers. So this is a great resource for being able to show your students role models and what sort of options are like that and really dispelling these cultural narratives. And I think just like the growth versus fixed mindset, I think it's really hard to disrupt these like very strongly held beliefs, but I think really important. Carrie. So Carrie, I like that. I like this Scratch project to play the thing because it shows that I use Scratch, which is what they're learning in that context, to make something that's useful to me and useful in their classroom. I will post it. I'm going to follow up from this with a blog post. But also you can, if you want it more quickly than that or don't want to have to find it later on, you can email me. My email is Lewis, Lewis, at hmc.edu. HMC stands for Harvey Mudd College. Or you can just glue my first and last names together, Colleen Lewis at Gmail. That's probably easier for you to remember, Colleen Lewis at Gmail. So I'm happy to share that program, and you can drop me an email if you want that or have any other questions that we don't get to during today's call. And Jennifer points out that code.org's got some awesome videos explaining concepts where they use relatable role models. Yeah, I love that. Oh, and Randy's got to leave in 5 minutes. Thanks for coming, Randy. We totally understand, and we'll wrap up by 5:30 at the absolute latest. I'll make sure to cut it off so that you all can go about your days. And thanks so much for spending an hour of your evening with me. I really appreciate it, and thanks for being so engaged in the chat. I think this makes it way more fun. Okay, so our number 6 tip, and again, we've got all these tips online and lots more tips, yada, 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 is facilitating showing off work. So Melissa can pull up the quiz again just to be like, oh, is this kind of engagement an issue or not an issue? And I think one thing I think about in my classrooms is I really want students to be taking pride in their work. I want them to be motivated to share what they've done, I want it to be student driven. One way I do that at the college level is for every homework assignment, I also include a second piece, which is like, oh, now that you've done this homework assignment and know how to do these things, here's where that can take you. And that thing that it might take you to do might take you a long time, and I'm not going to assign it as a homework problem, but just helping them understand you've just practiced these tools. Here's what you can use these tools to build. And I think making that explicit for students is really helpful as a way of trying to encourage this engagement, encourage this pride. So we've got 75% of our huge survey saying engagement is a problem. Yeah, and I think there can be a lot going on there. One is I find in Scratch, when kids open Scratch's paint editor, that means they're stuck. That means they're trying to program something in Scratch and they're stuck. And partially it means that because I have rules that they're not allowed to use paint during the classroom. So sometimes they have to paint things, but it's a very limited amount of time, and I try and time box it so that they're working on things where they really might need my help. So Randy points out, it can be difficult to have students show off their work, but it can really drive engagement. And Vicky loves having students comment on their peers' work. I think you can use that a lot to create a positive classroom environment. You know what I mean? So there's the go to other people's computers and post a sticky note of something you like about their project. Or I have half the kids in the class stay at their computer and then show off their work, and the rest of the class wander around and see other people's projects. One of the things that I think about when I'm doing that is who in the classroom gets access to the status of people thinking their project is cool. And so a phrase called complex instruction, it's a mode of thinking about building equitable classrooms. One of the things they do is they assign competence. So if I have a student who within the classroom is not afforded a lot of status in terms of their intellectual competence or their contributions to the class or their understanding of programming, etc., if they do something really cool, I'm gonna make a big deal about it and show other kids. Do you know what I mean? Of oh, make sure you check out so and so's project. They got this thing to work that we haven't even talked about yet in class or whatever. So I use this opportunity of showing off students' work to assign competence, which is this thing where, in a position of power as a teacher, you draw students' attention to the contributions of other students to help them respect that student in the ways you want them to. I love having kids get to see each other's work. It's really can be inspiring for them and inspiring for them to get to show off their work. And I think that's true even at the college level. So another thing to reflect on in our classrooms is thinking about facilitating just sort of the general pattern of people trying to show off. So are show-offs a problem in your teaching context? I think is another question. Actually, at Harvey Mudd, we're really lucky that in general showing off isn't a big problem. And I think some of that is things that we've baked into the classroom culture. So one of our classroom norms at Harvey Mudd is never raise your hand and answer a question and tell me something you knew before coming into this classroom. I only want you to raise your hand and answer questions where it's things you learned in this classroom, learned in this semester or this course. That's really what we value, is learning within this course, not what you knew before. Carrie mentioned digital portfolios that allow students to see their work, which wouldn't take away class time so they could look at it outside of class. That's awesome, Carrie. I love it. And so managing these show-offs, I think, is a really important thing that we're doing in our role as educators. Um, so that, one of the things that they found at University of Texas, Austin, I think it was, where they found that educators equated, in computer science classrooms, equated experience with smart. So, and I think that conflation really feeds into this geek gene idea. Oh, and Randy started teaching their students to make digital portfolios. Um, and Scratch projects, like Vicki mentions, are really helpful and easy to share, so it's a lot easier. Leslie Aronson, an former LAUSD teacher that I've worked with, also has students make portfolios, and that this can open doors for students as they make portfolios that then they can share with future potential employers, etc. I think that's awesome. Oh yeah, and Randy mentions that Google Sites are an easy way to start. And I think there's a few other tools that I've met teachers that really like them. I don't think I know them off the top of my head. But if other folks want to type those up, I like Google Sites in terms of its ease of use, but it doesn't make the most gorgeous websites. And we have just a few more minutes, and so I want to go through a few more pieces. And one is, I find in my classrooms that sometimes these narratives come about, like, oh, it's awesome having women on the team because that makes the team more collaborative, or these other kind of essentializing pieces. And what they're really doing, in the gender example, I think they're forgetting that variation, that population variation that we talked about before with computer scientists as being really varied. If you look at math performance in the US, so 10 years ago or so, there was a difference in men's and women's SAT math score performance, and men did better. And so that fuels this cultural narrative that men are better than math, and it just reinforces that sort of trope. But then if you look at the math SAT score data, you're like, oh, actually, the difference in average performance between a man and a woman is like a quarter of a question. So you're like, oh, that's actually not helpful for thinking about men's and women's performance in math in general. Like, that's not information, a quarter of a question maybe doesn't even matter. And these days, there's no difference in men's and women's performance on the math SAT. They are not seeing difference, but still, a lot of these cultural narratives are much more difficult to extinguish. And Vicki adds in Google Sites and Seesaw for younger students. And Randy's headed out. Thanks for coming. And I'm having a few more webinars, so hopefully we'll see you again soon, Randy. Okay, I am cognizant of the time, Melissa. I promise not to go over. And so this last example that we were talking about is this sort of gender essentialist idea. And we talked before about the computer essentialist idea, where we really need to show our students a wide range of role models to be like, oh, it's not just one thing. There's variation. And even when there's differences between two populations, probably it's mainly overlapping in the general behavior or characteristic. And so our last piece that I want you to think about is I want you to think about what's something you want to change in your classroom tomorrow. What's a norm you want to reset? What's a practice you want to try? And maybe type that in. We've lost Randy for now, but do that. And while you're typing that in, I'll go over the last few slides, and I promise to end on time. And this is encouraging students to ask peers questions. We won't vote on this one just because we're running out of time. But I think this is is just essential so that students can get the help that they need, so that they can get an extra pair of eyes. I challenge my students that sometimes I think that cheating is pedagogically appropriate. If a student has really tried a problem and then they get maybe more help than I would want them to get from a peer, that might be the right thing for them in that moment. And I need to make sure as an educator I give them enough times to practice so that even if they get a little too much help, it's okay. So Jennifer wants to use the method of not answering a question with prior knowledge before entering a room. And Vicki says, I'm going to do some intentional breaks with my middle school students. I really like that. On this last slide, I'll leave you with check out CSTeachingTips.org. You can follow us on Twitter, follow us on Facebook. We post 3 tips a day, so you can just get some of these constant reminders. I think it's really helpful to take the time to reflect and think back. And Carrie wants to work with the digital portfolio so students can better see each other's work. Thank you so much for participating. This was a ton of fun. Please feel free to email me. It's ColleenLewis@gmail.com. And probably, oh, and these are just extra slides in case we went under. Yeah, and now we're to Melissa, and we're right at 5:30. I'm sorry.
You are. Thanks so much, Colleen. This has been amazing. We will get this posted to the website, and that'll get tweeted out. So if you want to see that, then I would suggest you follow our Twitter stream as well, and I'm sure that Colleen will help us to retweet that. We have 3 webinars so far coming up in the month of October. There may potentially be a 4th one that's added. One, play your way into CS with Makey Makey, going to be specifically geared toward our K-5 teachers. So if you know of the younger teachers who are interested in getting started with computer science and not sure where to go, this may be a great one. Then we're going to talk a little bit about inquiry practices. Gail Chapman, who was one of the Exploring Computer Science main founders, she will be doing this. However, it's going to go beyond the ECS course, so don't feel like it's something that's specific to that one. So if thinking about inquiry and the ways in which you're using those techniques in the classroom is interesting, then join us with them on October 19th. And then on the 20th, this one is going to be specific to the APCSP course. We're going to be looking at the Explore Performance task. So lots of different ways to stay connected. If you go to the csforallteachers.org website, there is a tab for events where you can look at and find all this information, and I'll leave you with the email, website, and Twitter handle for ways to stay connected with us. So thank you, everyone. We appreciate your time and look forward to you joining us in a future webinar. Thanks so much, and special thanks to Colleen tonight. We look forward to being with you later again this year.
Sounds great. Thanks so much, everybody. Nice to meet you.
Good night.